Well, good morning. It's great to see so many people. You know, last year we had a really big event here, and there was room for everybody to sit. It just goes to show you that technology is really making people think through how they're evolving. What a great place for us to be here at the museum. This is our third year at this particular place. I always like walking through the hall, and you see the evolution of society from newspapers back in the 1800s and some of the silly headlines, but you get to see how society has really evolved on a global basis, and it's kind of a great theme for us to think through how we're evolving with technology. And what a great place for us to be here. We're stuck in between the White House and the Capitol, the power avenue of the world. This is where a lot of very big decisions are made, decisions that affect our country, decisions that quite frankly affect the world. And for all of you that are technologists and understand technology, every single one of the decisions that they're making into law, is going to have a very big technical component. I can't think of a single policy that's getting put in place in our government or any other government that doesn't have a huge technical component. And that puts a great deal of responsibility on all of us on how we think through their notion of policy and law and how to transform those ideas into technology that citizens can use, and not only use, but love. That's what I think we're trying to get solved today. Now, business and government are a lot more alike than most people think. It always shocks me when I'm meeting people in government that they think that business has it all figured out. I can say with extraordinary confidence, we don't. Grab the newspaper 2 weeks ago with Equifax. We don't have it all figured out in every single process and every part of development. One of my favorite companies, Tesla, they're supposed to build 1,500 cars. They built 340. This is supposed to be the most technically advanced company in the world, and they're struggling as well. Progress is hard. Technology is difficult. We have to continuously think of ways of bringing that together. Now, when I think about business and technology, and I think about government and technology, I really don't separate the two. Other than when we get the technology wrong as government professionals, we're probably violating the law. And so there's a higher degree of certainty that we need when we're building out these systems. Secondly, when we talk about scale, our user base is 350 million people. There's nobody that has a bigger user base than the federal government in the United States. It just happens to be the fact. So when we're building out systems, there are things we have to think about that you just don't have to think about in the private sector. Now, when we're thinking about all of this policy work, we have to get that right. And for the most part, over the years, we do get it right because it's law. It's measurable. The thing that we haven't pivoted towards is user experience. We get the logic right, we don't get the customer experience right. And if we don't get that right, we don't get the adoption. And if you don't get the adoption, you don't get the data. And if you don't get the data, you're not going to be successful in the application economy. And that's one of the things I want to talk about today is how do you think about the process of getting that right? First of all, you have to think about how you build things. When we build things in the government, it's built to last. We put these policies in place. Laws don't get changed quickly once they get put in place. They're going to be here for a long time. When we build those systems are thought through and they're built for a long period of time. What we don't think about is the notion of built to last works against built to change. We have an environment that is changing extraordinarily quickly. And when I think about the way we build systems in general, and a new paradigm of how we're building systems in both in business and in some parts of the government, it has to be agile, which requires change. And there's a lot going on with respect to how you do that. There are best practices to make that happen, and I'm going to walk through a number of those today. But in a modern government, you have to build what we call your modern software factory. And we see this happening on a global basis as every company has truly become a software company. In the same way that every policy that's done down the street turns into software, every single way that you want to get your product or service in front of a customer is going to have an extraordinarily high technology component. It's just the way that our businesses evolved. It's the way that government's evolving. So when you do this, it's not just about the technology. There's a cultural element that comes with being built to change. There's a cultural element that comes with being agile. When you don't think through those cultural activities and lead your teams through that and make them understand that this is going to be net beneficial to them, I think you get stagnation. There's a whole number of tools that you can have that help you get that done. But when you don't merge those two things together, I think you have a lot of projects that get off the ground but never get into production. In an era where we are all fighting on a global basis to get the best people to come work for our agencies and for our companies, the number one thing that makes a great technologist leave your company is when they work hard and their idea never gets into production. That's a huge responsibility that all of us as tech leaders have. If we're going to put this workforce to work, whatever they do has to get into production and has to be used. It's the number one reason why people, the best people, leave organizations. Now, when you're thinking about being built to change, this is not something that is foreign to our government, introducing technology at scale. When you think about it, everyone talks about the internet. Everyone understands that. That was built by the government. It's probably one of the best ideas that has ever been proliferated on a global basis. But our government has built hundreds of great technologies that we use all day, every day. GPS technology. Everybody here has a cell phone. Everybody uses GPS technology. That's government built. Microchips, coming out of the back of the 50s. All that technology was pioneered by our government. One of the biggest topics for all of us right now, healthcare. The GNOME project, government sponsored. When we think about how we want to evolve as a planet and talk about renewable energy, nobody's done more research and put more research into production on renewable energy than the US government. All of that research, government-based. So it's not like we don't understand big technology ideas, and it's not like we don't understand how to get those technologies out to the masses. The issue is how fast do we do it? The barrier to entry and the pace and rate and change of getting that technology out to the masses has accelerated. To the extent that we can take these great ideas that are currently being funded and get that out to the masses is something that we have to take extraordinary care about. Now, we have 4 presidents in my era that have done this. We've seen work done by Clinton. We've seen work done by Bush. We've seen work done by President Obama. We see a lot of work being done by President Trump, and he's putting a lot of that into policy. We have 2 speakers here today, I'm not sure if they're here yet, that have, over the last year, put an incredible amount of work. More work has been done on American innovation and technology and modernizing federal government in the last year than I've seen in the previous 5 or 6 years. So Representative Will Hurd, is he here? He's going to be here on the panel. He put the MGT Act together, done a fantastic job. I had an opportunity to meet with him 2 times as he was drafting the bill. This is one where he was reaching out to CEOs in the private sector, helping understand what is the art of the possible, got the collaboration in place, and I can't stress how difficult it is to get something like that done in the environment that we're in. He absolutely put his nose to the grindstone, felt very passionate about it, built a kind of constituency to get that law approved. And that's a great law. Now, how do you take that law and that policy and get it into production? Well, that comes with Chris Littell, who is working for the Office of American, I think it's called the American Tech Council. I've participated in 2 of those as well. He is a great pioneer and a great operator in the private sector, and he's bringing that skill set to the government. He's been extraordinarily collaborative with CEOs in the private sector. We've been to the White House multiple times, and I think you're going to see not only the law and the need, but I think with the leadership that's being put in place today, you're going to see an opportunity for a great amount of innovation within the federal government. And it's a big deal. There's $80 billion spent on federal IT systems. About $65 billion of that is spent on systems that are 10 to 15 years old. So when you take a look at how much is there, how much budget is left for innovation and replacing new systems, this is a big problem to solve. Techniques of the past will not work to solve this problem. There's no shortage of conversation with respect to how those budgets are going to be appropriated over the next several years. I'm not an expert in that area, but I understand it's extraordinarily difficult. We just see the top end number. When it comes to the actual sausage making and getting these projects approved, I mean, that's a very difficult thing. To think that we're going to have an excess of budget to be able to work with, I think is naive. I think we have to look at how we build and how we get things into production and take a different approach. We're going to hear a bunch about that on the panel today. So when you're thinking about technology and getting technology into production, this is something that is unique in the federal government when it comes to scale. I think that the way that we do it in the federal government has things that can inform both the private sector, and I wouldn't start from scratch. There's a lot of systems in place that you can abstract and put a layer of abstraction in front of so that you're not trying to rebuild something that already works. How the citizens use that system and how you collect data, I think, is where we have opportunities to drive massive improvement. There's an incredible amount of data in the federal government. That data is not being used to inform how we should build systems in the future. To the extent that we can get after that, I think we're going to have definitely a leapfrog attempt and a leapfrog notion that we can get these systems in place that our citizens actually like using them. Because right now, when you take a look at most of our government systems, they're very difficult to use. They don't answer the problems or solve the problems that we're looking for. And to the extent that we can have a more customer-oriented approach and abstract some of the back-end data systems that still have to chug along and work because we know they work, they solve the laws and the policies that we currently have, and they work at scale. There are techniques for making that happen. So let's talk about that a little bit. This notion of a modern software factory, just about every CEO I talk to is trying to digitize their workforce, trying to digitize their business models. Some of these business models change completely the way the company operates. You know, you just saw yesterday that Time is no longer going to put out a print magazine. That shouldn't be a big shock to anybody, but how long did it take to make that decision when you take a look at other companies that have already gone to digital, like Bloomberg, for example, and have had massive amount of uptake, and they've actually had a lot of customer attraction? There are penalties to not getting to digital quick enough. If you decide to make a play and get yourself digitized, you have to think about what are you going to do. And this is when we were looking at how we work with our customers, and we noticed that there's this change happening driven by the need for speed, where development and operations are coming closer together. And as we started thinking about that, the concept of repeatability came in place. And when you start thinking about speed and repeatability, this imagery and metaphor of a factory started permeating into our language. And then we started looking at how do you build a modern software factory. If you think about every company becoming a technology company, getting your modern software factory built so you understand what you're doing and you can make it repeatable. This is a metaphor that we're using that's gotten a lot of traction in the private sector because it's understood easily by key decision makers, CEOs, CFOs, COOs. It's also understood easily by developers, architects, and business analysts. To the extent that we can get those communities talking and understand this is what the goal is and this is what we're trying to look for, I think that we can move the agenda much, much faster. Now, what do you get out of this? You get agility, you get the concept of automation, so you build it once, use it many times. The maximum amount of performance insight. I can't stress how important this is. When I take a look at issues we've had over the last 2 years, it's not understanding what an application does when it gets into production. We had one great idea that came out of our CTO, Otto Burkus, that's here. We used a new piece of technology. It was a combination of open source and technology we put in place. Massive customer uptake. We were so happy. We were patting each other on the back. Everything was fantastic. Never in our wildest dreams did we think a customer would build in a short period of time a 2 terabyte database. broke the technology. Our modern software factory needed to be adjusted. We had to go take a look at that technology, and what we found is the open source technology that we were using was from a version 2 years ago. They had already bumped into this problem. We didn't pay enough attention to it. We had to massively go re-put that new version into our production environment. Embarrassing to us, but this is how the modern software factory has to work. And if you get the testing and you start thinking about how your customers are going to use this earlier, you don't bump into problems like that. This is something that we pay an extraordinary amount of attention to. How does that application work in production? Lastly, security. You can't pick up a newspaper today and not see the dramatic impact of security. Just in the last week, we've seen, or last 2 weeks, we've seen, dramatic breaches with respect to security, self-inflicted wounds. I live on the East Coast here, and my office is in New York. I live in Greenwich. One of the CEOs of a great company is doing a great job. Tim Armstrong from AOL just rebranded the whole company as Oath. Very proud. Spent $4.8 billion buying Yahoo. Wakes up and finds out that he's got 3 billion breaches he has to deal with. Self-inflicted wounds. These are avoidable problems. We have to pay extraordinary attention. So when you have great innovation, but you don't think through the security, I think that your innovation is just an absolute waste. You're going to cost your company, or you're going to cost your agency millions and millions of dollars in remediation and work, not to mention reputational damage. So if you build your modern software factory, you're going to get enhanced trust, because when you're building a modern software factory, you're bringing your constituents into the application. You're not guessing what they want. You're bringing them in, and you're forcing them to participate in the design. So when you build it and put it in production, you have a very good idea of what the customers are going to be using that for. We do not do any development at CA Technologies at all without user input. If we don't have customer adoption built into the process before we write a line of code, that project does not get green lighted for development. We don't do any committed build anymore. This whole notion of build it and they will come, great movie. Love it. Absolute disaster in technology. We don't build it and they will come. We bring them in. We really understand what their problems and needs are, and then we use our modern software factory to go build it in an iterative fashion. I can't stress that. I think that's the only way that you can build software going forward. That gives you a better user experience, and when it really comes down to it, it's going to be about user experience. We see a lot of talk happening right in that white building down the street here about what is Facebook and Google going to be doing with all of the data they collect. The data is the new gold. If you're back in the early 1900s, you want to be in the oil business. Today, you want to be in the data business. That's where the future is going to be. Now, we see that happening for consumer applications, but if I was to tell you how many companies are paying attention to the data in the private sector, I think you'd be shocked. In the same way that when we built software in the enterprise for other enterprise players, we never cared about the user interface. As a matter of fact, we could teach a course on bad user interfaces. Nobody could build bad user interfaces better than enterprise software. Absolutely horrible. Along comes Google, Facebook, Apple, gave everybody, technology doesn't have to be hard. Technology should be easy, it should work, it should be connected. That informed all of us in enterprise software that we have to get the user experience right. The same people that are making a fortune on data have informed enterprises that the data matters. One of our great customers, United Healthcare, they separated out the company and they built another part of their company called Optum. They have the most amount of claims data in the world, and they've been mining that data. They have they process 160 million claims a year, and from that they've been able to figure out patterns on diabetes. They've been able to inform their constituents on their own health care. They've been able to streamline the way that they provide health care, and they're mining that data the same way that you would see a Google, the same way that you would see a Facebook, the same way that you would see an Apple. This is all coming to enterprise software, and I can't stress how much of that activity I see in the private sector. Nobody has more data than the US federal government. To the extent that we can put that data to work to make customer experience better, I think is an incredible opportunity. But that doesn't get done on 15 and 20-year-old systems. A new approach has to happen. Reliability. You can't put things into production that fail. The notion that every CEO is looking for is how do I get from this idea to an outcome? And the pressure on IT organizations in the private sector, which I feel is no different than what you're experiencing as well, it's about this concept of speed. But that speed without reliability is a disaster. We have to make sure that when we're building applications, we think through what's it going to look like when it gets into production. I think it's harder for everybody in the government services. Once again, nobody operates at the scale of the US federal government. Now, when you're doing all of this and you're talking about change, everybody likes that. I'm a change agent. Usually when I meet somebody they say that they're a change agent, they're usually not a change agent. They're trying to disguise what they're doing today and protect it and put this moniker of a change agent in front of it. And the reason for it is change hurts. Everybody loves change, though, when it's not happening to them. But it hits you where it hurts the most. It hits you in your ego. You were the person that everybody used to come to because you were the expert at that technology. The technology you're using, nobody cares about anymore. Nobody cares about it anymore. You're pushed off into a maintenance category. It makes you feel like you don't matter anymore. It hurts. Nobody likes that. Compensation. Like it or not, we are in a fastly commoditizing environment. Our technology commoditizes every 5 years. If you have commodity-oriented skills, you're going to get a commodity-oriented paycheck. It just happens to be the way it works. Now, how do you combat that? Well, you reskill yourself. That's great. It takes an incredible amount of time. You know, you get one of these on your finger, you got a couple kids, you know, the novelty of having breakfast, lunch, and dinner at work, it wears off pretty thin. How are you going to retrain yourself? And let's take a look at how bad we as corporate America do on reskilling. There's a lot of work being done to help that change, but that work is slow. It is so easy right now to go to the gig economy or go to the free market, just buy the skill you need for that particular moment in time and not engage your workforce. I think it's a mistake. I think it's a huge mistake. I don't think it solves short-term problems. I know it doesn't solve medium-term problems. It's a disaster for long-term problems. When you think about how much technology needs to be built over the next 10 years, the people you have in your company right now, you need to take the responsibility to reskill them. Because I got to tell you, you're not going to go find them in the open market. Take care of those people. Put time in place to make sure that they get reskilled and retrained. Deal with their ego and their compensation issues. You're going to have a happy workforce, and you're going to have a productive workforce. And then risk. This is something we talk about a lot. Moving too fast can get you in trouble. There's no doubt about it. When you're playing with this, you want to have a thoughtful approach. Now, I will also argue, if you don't move, it's more risky than moving too fast. I think you get hurt on both ends of the spectrum, at both ends in disaster. You have to use your intellect, your understanding of your environment, your understanding of your constituency, and determine and make that a determined decision how fast you move. But I can guarantee you, if you do nothing, you will fail. If you move too fast, you will fail. This is a mature, thoughtful, deliberate decision that you have to stop, pause, and make sure you understand the ramifications of the changes that you're making. Let's go through a few examples of people that get it at various different ways and how they've built their modern software factory. The CTO of DC here, Rancha Vermapalli, that's a great one. I was happy to be able to get that one out. My last name is difficult to pronounce, so I understand how difficult it is for other people with a lot of consonants and vowels in their names. But this is a great example of agile and thinking outside the box. This is a problem that every single government has. It's a problem that I can guarantee every one of you have in your house, and it's who takes out the trash. I don't get it. I'm on the road all the time. How is it that when I go home, I'm the only one I feel that ever takes the trash out of the house? I have two teenagers. That thing will be overflowing, and I'll watch them just push it down rather than walk 15 feet to take it outside. Well, Arantxa had a different view on this. Simple idea. What happens if I put a sensor in a garbage can and understood how much garbage is there, and I knew that? How would that inform me? Once again, getting to this theme of collecting data. Collecting data, I know how much garbage is in there, and that can inform me on when to send out a garbage truck, what's the most efficient route to go pick up that garbage. There's 7,000 garbage cans in Washington, D.C. here. Started off with 400. Huge success. They'll move from 400 to thousands, and now they're collecting data. Now think of what you can do with that data. Think of how you can inform yourself and understand the traffic patterns and how people are using garbage cans around DC. That data can be mined to inform better decisions, better applications. It's just a great example of starting off small on a known problem to everybody and just making it better. This is something I think should be celebrated. It's agile at work, and once again, it gets to collecting the data. Here's another one. As you probably noticed from my accent, especially when I get into the out and about, I'm Canadian, and I'm looking across here. I see the Canadian flag with great pride. This is about Montreal. Great city, and growing up in Toronto, I hate their hockey team. This is a great example of the Montreal transit system. It's a big transit system. They have 178 bus routes, 65 stations, 4 or 5 subway lines. And once again, how do you connect with your customers? One of the things that everybody wants to understand is how do you make bus routes more efficient, and when's the bus going to show up? A simple application on a mobile phone that allows somebody to say, is the bus 30 seconds away or 3 minutes away? Great user experience. Customers were incredibly happy with that. Now think about what else that does. More efficient bus routes. Bus routes that had been in place for 10 to 15 years, once they had the data, they found out that those routes were not the most efficient routes. That's not what people wanted. They're making people walk 2 or 3 blocks because that's where the populations moved. And they were able to make a dramatic change, saved on fuel, saved on number of buses, informed them where they should be putting in more subway stations. This is a great example, once again, of using a set of technology and getting the data and providing a great user experience. This one's a little further in Singapore. The CTO of Singapore took the job, and this is about speed and agility as well, took the job 2 years ago, was tasked with solving one problem. One problem. Population of Singapore, 5.7 million people, 85 agencies. 85 agencies in Singapore. Whenever they had a problem, they called one number. Tree down in the neighborhood, called one number. A concert in a public park too loud, called one number. Water main broken, called one number. You know what that number was? The police. The police in Singapore were the traffic cops for 85 different government agencies. They had to hire so many police people just to handle that. They weren't doing police work. What he did is he used our API technology. Instead of rewriting all of these government agencies and having 85 different apps, simple application for the user, much more sophisticated on the back end. Wrote one app on a mobile application. You type in what your problem is, it directs you to the most appropriate agency. Everybody wins. Police force gets to do police work, agencies get to solve problems quicker, and the constituency in Singapore, what they get is they get better satisfaction because they're getting their problems solved much, much quicker. Once again, using the API technology, abstracting all of the legacy technology, not rebuilding it, but just connecting the customers to the technology in a new way. Here's one that I'm especially proud of, is the work that CA has done with the next generation identification system with the FBI. This is a true mission critical system. You know, this system has to be up 7x24, has to be able to solve the requests from 25,000 police agencies. And this is about checking palm prints, checking retina scans, checking fingerprints. On one day last year, they had 700,000 requests. When you think about that and you're building systems and you take a look at averages, this is not a system where you can play with averages. You have to be able to solve for the peak. And we inform them with our APM technology on how's the network bandwidth, how's the disk utilization, how's the memory utilization, how's the CPU utilization, so they can scale up their compute power as they're seeing transactions come in. Now, this is a great example of a government that's really thought through mission critical and how do I deal with agility in the compute and the operations side of the house. So these are great examples of how you can think through agility and examples of agencies and smaller governments that have built their own modern software factory where they can really connect with their constituencies and get product into production in a relatively safe, secure, and quick frame of mind. It's especially great for me when, you know, we've got Thanksgiving coming up here. I celebrate both. Canadian Thanksgiving was on Monday. I'll celebrate the American Thanksgiving in a few weeks here. But you have people come over your house and say, oh, so what do you do? What does CA Technologies do? These are the kinds of examples I talk about. You know, how we help people, how we take care of the trash in DC, how we help catch the bad guys with the FBI, how we make sure people get their morning commute, get to their morning commute on time in Montreal, how we help citizens in Singapore solve problems they're having with the different constituencies that they need. This is how the modern software factory in action works and solves real problems. So, we talked a little bit about risk. One of the things I would think would be reckless on my part if I told you everything is going to be great, you just jump on this bandwagon of modern software factory and it's going to work out, you know, extremely well. The fact of the matter is you have to make conscious decisions along the way. You have to really understand what you're doing as you're building out this factory. Let me walk you through a little bit of how that plays out and the things you should pay attention to. First of all, you have to have a form of digital intuition. The end game, where it's all going to end up, is data. So everything you're doing is going to end up in you collecting data. And as you collect that data, that's going to inform the next system, and the next system, and the next system that you're going to build. So to the extent that when you're building these systems and you've got some digital intuition, how can I get an application in front of my constituencies that gives them what they want, but I'm able to collect data so that I can start to anticipate their needs? That's the golden standard. It takes a long time to build that muscle memory. But you know, they always have that saying, what's the best time to plant a tree? You know, 20 years ago. The next best time to plant a tree, right now. So when you're starting to think about what you want to do when you leave here today, I would encourage you to start thinking about building your own digital intuition. And that digital intuition has to be informed with respect to how you solve problems and give people what they want. And in the process of doing that, collect the digital information, because what you really want to do is you want to anticipate their needs, solve their problems before they realize that it's a problem. Now, to do that, the first thing you have to do is get into this concept of agile and agile mindset. I think the concept of building software with a waterfall methodology is dead. You know, just think about the process. You're going to have a whole bunch of people in a room building out requirements. It takes them six months. Let's say it takes them 6 months to a year. Then they're going to turn it over to a bunch of developers. They're going to pick, you know, some development platform. They're going to start building it. It's going to take minimum a year, probably takes 2 years. And then they're going to hand over this great piece of art that they have to a group called operations, who's going to say it's not fit for human consumption. And they're going to spend 6 months tuning it, tailoring it, putting the security in place. And here we are, 3 to 4 years later, your great idea gets into production at scale. It just doesn't work that way. By the time you do that, whatever you are building probably doesn't matter. You have to get into an agile mindset. You have to start thinking about the concept of lean canvases. You have to get into the concepts of big room planning. the way that you build requirements, the way that you build these systems. You have to bring citizens into their understanding of how the system's going to work. You have to pick modern architectures that you can swap out over time. All of this is an agile mindset. There is a science to this. There's a process to this. I would highly recommend becoming an expert at agile. Automation. Once again, we are not going to be in a situation where you're going to go build it and just drop it over the wall to an operations group. I think, once again, that's dead. I think that you see operations people being part of development organizations, and you're building out the operational chops as you're building the application. To the extent that you can bring these two groups together, I think you have a higher probability of success when it does get to production. This is about thinking about unit tests, integrations tests, systems tests, performance tests, long before you go through those gates in the waterfall methodology. You're doing it iteratively. You're building it out in real time. I can't stress how quickly you will move if you adopt getting the operations closer into development. In the same way, we're not ready for this yet. We're pushing as hard as we possibly can. I don't think that you're going to be 5 years from now where you don't put security into the development process. There's a consulting firm that we hired called Coleman Parks. They interviewed a whole bunch of developers. And our business is moving from operations to developers. If you take a look at the things we invest in on a lot of developer tools and developer productivity. We wanted to understand developers better. Asked them a simple question. 68% of developers would put something into production, a new feature into production, even ahead of testing the security. You gotta be kidding me. It's like they've never read a newspaper or went to a website that has some type of news. We have a cultural issue with the respect to development. I mean, when I was writing code, trust me, I never thought about security at all. That was somebody else's job. I was the creative person working on my coding art, and it was beautiful. And after I finished with my masterpiece, yeah, you might have to put a frame on it, and we'll have somebody hanging up on a wall. It doesn't work like that. We have a very strong opinion with respect to security and how code is delivered. 4 out of 5 applications that go into production have a security issue. Of those 4 out of 5, 15% of them have a material security issue. What we're trying to build is when you're writing code in the same way that you have a word processor, when you're writing code that we know has a security breach, we're trying to get you to change the code as you're writing it. We're not quite there yet, but we've ingested 3 trillion lines of code and have looked at all the security breaches with respect to that code, and we're driving, once again, chase the data. We're trying to get the pattern recognition, and our whole purpose of doing that is giving a tool. We have an incubation in place that does this, where you're writing that code and we know that you're writing a known security breach. We want to inform you about that before you get through unit test and system test and long before it gets into production. To the extent that that happens, I think we build a much safer environment. I can't stress enough, for those of you that are technologists or managed technologists, you have to start demanding that they think more about security very early in the development cycle. So if you do all that and build your modern software factory, I think that you're going to be much more agile. I think you're going to get much closer to your constituents. I think you're going to be able to keep the best developers in your organizations because they're doing interesting work. I think you need to invest in those developers because they're your future. And if you do all that and build your own modern software factory, I think that we're going to solve a lot of issues with the modernization of the federal IT department. We'd love to be your partner. We have a lot of partners here that would also like to help you. To the extent that we can be of service to you, we're happy to do that. Thank you very much for your time.